Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and this week's edition for news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, July 7th, 2017, and lots of information. We've got a very special program today. This is a post-July 4th program, and we're going to pull in some information of events that took place July 4th, and we're going to tie this entire program to encapsulate information for a 2-year anniversary that people are not quite aware of that actually took place this week on July 3rd. The program is going to focus, in the news is going to be the assault on God's way, God's people, and on God in general. The first story we have is the rise in the Muslim refugee crime in Germany. The second story we're going to focus on is a gay pride that took place here in America. And the last, we're going to bring in Canada and some information from around the world. Then we're going to tie these entire program stories to the biblical nuggets of Tammuz 9. So if you're not familiar with Tammuz 9, you want to stay tuned to this program to pay attention. But before we get into all of that, we got a last-minute story that actually just came in this morning that I want to focus on first, because this could be a game changer. July 4th, that's why we talked about this being post-July 4th program. This took place on July 4th in Korea. The news came out that North Korea claims to have successfully tested the first intercontinental ballistic missile in Korea. The story comes out, it says North Korea claims to have conducted its first test of an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, the development that, if confirmed, could move the regime closer to being able to strike the U.S. mainland and dramatically strengthen its hands in negotiations in Washington. We actually have a little video piece, just a little bit over a minute long, so let's start our program off by playing that video.
Another ballistic missile fired out of North Korea Tuesday morning, testing international patience even further. Japan says the missile flew for about 40 minutes and may have landed in the country's exclusive economic zone.
North Korea has again enforced a launch of a ballistic missile, ignoring repeated warnings from the international community.
It comes just days before world leaders meet for the G20 summit, where the U.S., China, Japan, and South Korea are expected to discuss efforts to rein in the reclusive state. Donald Trump has already held back-to-back calls with Tokyo and Beijing over the issue, with both Asian countries reaffirming their commitment to dealing with the North. Pyongyang has been rushing to develop a nuclear missile capable of hitting the U.S. Moon Jae-in has called for a National Security Council meeting in response to the latest launch. The South Korean leader met with Trump last week, where the U.S. president called for a determined response to North Korea and stressed the importance of an alliance between the two sides.
Immediately after this test launch, the United States conducted their own test to show the pinpointed accuracy of our missiles should they continue to go this route. At this particular time, they're showing no signs of stopping what they're doing. So the United States has revved up their rhetoric as to what they will do. And now we're looking at the possibility for the first time that they actually have the capability of taking nuclear weapons that they actually do have and putting them on a missile and being able to travel the distance they need to reach the U.S. Now, this is going to alarm a lot of people when all this news began, and you begin to hear it. By the time this program gets out, you've probably heard it many, many days of what's going on. So let me take and show you exactly what this missile did. So what I have here is they're showing, because of the distance that this thing needs to go, they can't actually shoot it far enough across the globe. So what they do is they shoot it in height. So they shoot it in height that went up approximately 1,800 miles high, and it went 580 miles from its launch, and it was in the air for 37 minutes. All right, so now, if they actually launched this missile that they're claiming they did, or are capable of doing now, and they shot it on the trajectory around the globe, they would go just over 4,000 miles, or 4,100 miles, long enough to be able to reach the shores of the United States. I've got a second graph here, and this is from David Wright of All Things Nuclear blog, and what he's doing is he's showing us now in this globe where they shot the missile how far it could actually go. So if they shot from Korea, it could come all the way around over the North Pole through Canada, and look how far all the way down past Hawaii. So this could actually shoot well into the United States and to reach many cities. So this has got everyone's attention, and this is the first time they have actually launched one of these type of missiles capable of carrying a nuclear weapon. So I wanted to bring this to you as a last-minute story, which we didn't anticipate doing in this program, but I thought it was alarming enough to bring to everyone's attention that we should be paying attention and praying for what's going on. So now, let's get into the program that we actually began to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the assault from so many areas that's going on around the world and how it applies into the removal of God's way and God's law. And we're going to tie it into a 2-year anniversary of Tammuz 9, which people know about, but they do not put it on God's calendar. So let's begin with the aggression here. We're talking about the surge in knife crimes in Germany. So we're going to bring you some startling statistics of the immigrant problem that Germany's facing, but not only Germany. Every country who's opened their borders to the refugee problem coming into their country are all facing the same issues. All right, they're talking about knife and axe murders by the immigrants. This is from June 6, Germany, surge in stabbings and knife crimes. Knife-related crimes are surging, the report said. Perpetrators of the victims of such crimes are increasingly younger and increasingly female. So what they're telling us is that these assaults now, they're taking place on more and more of the innocent and the helpless of people who cannot defend themselves against these types of crimes. Germany's knife crime problem is being exacerbated by its lenient judicial system, which offers which offenders receive relatively light sentences, and even for serious crimes. The Gatestone went on to say this: during the past 10 years, the number of knife-related crimes in Germany has increased by more, you ready for this? More than 1,200%. Around 4,000 such crimes were reported to police in 2016, up from just 300 in 2007. 4,000 knife crimes in 2016, up 1,200%. This is absolutely amazing. The surge in knife-related violence in Germany coincides with Chancellor Angela Merkel's decision to allow in some 2 million migrants from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Going on in the story, the number of reported knife crimes in Germany jumped by 600% alone in just the past 4 years, from 550 in 2013 to 4,000 in 2016. More than 1,600 knife-related crimes were reported in Germany just the first 5 months of 2017, an average of 300 such crimes each month, or 10 knifing crimes per day in Germany. This is something that the ISIS has called for, to strike out with knives and weapons. And by the way, so have the Palestinians against the PLO, against Israel, in Israel itself. And we began to see just a few years ago the increase in knife crimes in Israel. So again, it all ties in to anything directly related to God. And so in this story, you began to see how deadly these crimes can be. In addition to this, the second problem that they're facing is the abuse of women. Now, what's amazing is here in America, they talk about protecting women's rights. Where are the voices when you see a picture like this and you see the abuse of women and the lack of respect that they have for them? Where are the voices? How is it possible that in this country that we live in, that we can keep our mouths silent, speak out against the conservative Christian movement, talking about the abortion and issues of protecting life, and say nothing about this, and not raise a single voice against the Muslim people and how they treat women? So now, let's get back to this story here. They're talking about the increase in sex crimes that have doubled in Germany. In July 7, 2016, Germany actually toughened their sex crimes laws. They literally toughened it, but it was to no avail. No means no. The legislation classified groping as sex crime to make it easier to report rape and deport foreign offenders. Despite the new laws, the sex crimes continue to rise. The majority of the sex crimes that they're facing now in this rise is coming from the immigrants that are coming into their country, the countries that they've opened their borders to give help and to give relief. June 12th, in the story, in an annual report called The Criminality in the Context of Migration, which is published by the Federal Criminal Police Office, the report says this: on April 27th, revealed an increase of nearly 500% in migrant sex crimes. Now let's just take for a second, let's stop. 500%. While these crimes continue to increase, while the women speak out for what they're going through, their federal government continues to attack those who raise their voice to stop it. This is absolutely horrendous for what's going on around the country. We have literally reached our time where the Bible talks they will call good evil and evil good. And we're beginning to see the proliferation now on a global scale, unprecedented in modern times, beginning to take place, which is part of the reason we're talking about this in our story today. According to the report, the main offenders in 2016 says this: Syria, up 318% in 2015. Afghanistan, up 259%. Now, these are the refugees coming from these countries. Iraq, up 222%. Pakistan, up 70%. Iran, up 329%. Algeria, up 100%. Morocco, up 115%. All right, let me get back to that slide. All right, so now, these countries of the migration coming into Germany are sharing in this amount of magnitude the sex crimes on women in Germany. Now, this is just one country. Every country in Europe is going through the exact same problem. And when you raise your voice, you become the one who has to be intolerant, bigoted, biased, and you're actually put down and attacked by those who should be protecting you. So it's no wonder that people simply close their mouth, close their doors, and stay off the streets. And in England, the women are saying that they're afraid to even go out on the streets, especially at night. All right, going on. Now, let's pick up this assault of what we're talking about against God now from another perspective, because you're going to see all of these perspectives all tie into the same thing, is once the removal of God comes from a nation or a people, a body, a government, you begin to see all of these things begin to deteriorate and trickle down to the deterioration of that nation. So now, in America, there was a parade, they called it it was a tolerance parade, they called it. And this is from the Denison Forum. It says the Israeli flags are expelled from the Gay Pride Parade. Now, these are the people who claim to be so tolerant of all people's rights. But let me show you what went on. I believe this was in Chicago. Yep, that's what it says. Jewish people celebrating the LGBT pride in Chicago were told that they could not display the Israeli flag because of other people found it offensive. So I got a picture. This is from the article, the story from the Denison. This was the flags that they were showing in that story. All right, in the story they were showing, and I didn't realize this, but these are actually gay flags with the Israeli flag symbol on the flag. The report went on to say, Jews were not the only people rejected by this march for tolerance, and this was a march for tolerance. So we can tolerate everyone but the Jews. The amazing part of this story was that the Jews who were marching with these flags came from Israel because they were supposed to have their rights protected in this parade. So the Jews were not the only people rejected for this march of tolerance. American flags were not welcome, as they were also likewise considered signs of oppression. So here we are in America, a parade marching for tolerance. In America, the American flag is not even allowed to be in that parade, nor is the Israeli flag from the Jews in the Middle East. It's amazing how they centered on these items of these people who still have a connection to God as the assault, and the people to be removed from this parade. Flags from other nations were present at the event, however, it went on to say. Going on, several people who carried the Star of David flag were removed from the march. One of them said that she lost count on the number of people who harassed her. The organizers explained that they are anti-Zionist and that their organization supports the liberation of Palestine and all oppressed people everywhere. So those who carried those flags, they were removed because the Gay Pride Parade supports the Palestinians against Israel. All right, let's go on. A couple weeks ago, we talked about this Canadian bill, and we brought it out in the June 16th News, Nuggets, and Insights program. So if you missed it, you can go to God's Unchanging Word, pull up the archives for News, Nuggets, and Insights, look for June 16th, and you'll see the story. We get a rather lengthy story about this Canadian bill. It was called Bill 89, and under the name, the Supporting Children, Youth, and Families Act, we introduced to our audience what was going on in Canada. And thanks to all those who watch our program up in Canada who've been sending us this information, we deeply appreciate that and being able to stay on top of this. This bill in Canada, under that name, Supporting Children, actually was an assault against Christian families who do not support the LGBTQI movement. All right, so we reported that Canada has now passed what critics have called totalitarian legislation that could give more power to the state to remove children from the homes of Christians and others who oppose the LGBT agenda. This was just 3 weeks ago. Just 3 weeks ago. Look what's happened now that we're going to report how fast things are changing. And I'm telling you this now because we're going to tie all this in when we get into the biblical portion of the standard that has been removed. And once you remove God as the standard, everyone does what's right in their own mind, and everything just deteriorates rapidly. Now, the new bill that we want to talk about today, this is from the Daily Caller News Foundation. The headlines read, "The Canadians could face hate crimes over using the wrong gender pronouns." Now, it's going to take an education just to find out what a gender pronoun is. The last count, we were up well over 30 or 40 different genders. So how do you call someone? And they're passing a law that if you use the wrong gender, you could face a hate crime, possibly be sentenced and put in jail. It's called Bill C-16, Transgender Pronouns. On June 15th, Justin Trudeau announced the passing of the bill in the Senate. This is literally a tweet. I copied this for the program. This was his tweet to Canada. By the way, we're not the only country that has a leader who's tweeting. It's being started to do it around the world. And this is from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and this came out on June 15th, 7:53 p.m. Great news, he says. Bill C-16 has passed the Senate, making it illegal to discriminate based on gender identity or expression. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know what that means. Gender identity. Because you see, the genders change. You can wake up this morning and feel like you're a boy. Tonight you might feel like, well, I'm a 16-year-old girl. And I was just reading the information sent in an email from my wife, how to even have ecosexual genders, or people make love to trees and the ground and flowers. I was like, how are you ever going to stay on top of this? I have no clue. But he was talking about, this is great news. This is from LifeSite News, and this is what they say about this law. Canada passed a law Thursday, June 15th, making it illegal to use the wrong gender pronouns. Critics say that Canadians who do not subscribe to progressive gender theory could be accused of hate crimes, jailed, fined, and made to take anti-bias training. I don't know what to say. Read what they're saying here. Gender theory. In other words, this is a theory. This isn't a law. This isn't something in science. And so it can change at the moment. But if you don't change at the moment with whatever people feel, you could be considered to go to jail. It's a hate crime. Think about what, there's nothing concrete here. I actually went and looked, and I'm going to show you in just a couple of minutes. I wanted to go find out what does this mean? Gender thinking and gender, I can't even think of the words that they were using here. All right, going on. Canada's Senate passed the bill C-16, which puts gender identity and gender expression. So I said, well, how do you determine what the gender identity is and what a gender expression is? How does a person express themselves? Maybe I'm reading how they express themselves wrong. So I get taken to court and go to jail if I did something wrong that offends this person. All right, let me pick it up again. The Senate passed Bill C-16, which puts gender identity and gender expression into both the country's Human Rights Code as well as the hate crime category of its criminal code by a vote of 67 to 11. So we have, let's get this right now. We've got a theory that you're going to put somebody in jail if they misread how you think you feel at the moment. Do I have that right? I think that's what I'm reading here, because that's exactly what they're saying. What is gender expression? I didn't even know what it was. I'll be honest with you. I'm reading this. I said, what is gender expression? So I've got two different reports here. An earlier report from 2011 and one more recent. From the Guild Foundation, this is a little more recent. Gender expression refers to the ways in which each manifests masculinity or femininity. It is usually an extension of our gender identity and our innate sense of being male or female. Each of us expresses a particular gender every day. And by the way, we style our hair, select our clothing, and even the way we stand. Our appearance, our speech, behavior, movement, and other factors signal that we feel. We wish to be understood as masculine or feminine, or as a man or a woman. There you go. What does that mean? It means whatever you feel like at the time, that's what you're going to express. But if I read that wrong, and that's what they're expressing, I got a real problem if I live in Canada now, especially if the person gets offended and tries to take you to court. You don't have a leg to stand on. This is absolutely amazing. From a report in 2011, all right, this is from Shatterproof, 2011, gender identity is one's internal personal sense of being a man or a woman, or a boy or a girl. For transgender people, for their birth-assigned sex and their own internal sense of gender identity don't match. So if you're born a boy and you don't feel like a boy internally, well, that's your identity, where you identify yourself as a girl. This was in 2011, but since the laws were changed in 2015, this no longer holds water now, because people identify themselves with at least 30 different things. There can be 30 different identities, and some people said as many as 60 or 70 different identities now. So every time somebody feels different, I feel like, okay, I'm a turtle today. I feel like I'm a turtle, guys. All right, let me go roll around on my back and keep me out of the sun. All right, so this was in 2011. They at least defined it a little bit better. The gender expression was identified as external manifestation of one's gender and identity, usually expressed as masculine, feminine, or gender variant behavior, clothing, haircut, voice, and body characteristics. So primarily the two boils down to basically this, but it doesn't have to anymore according to the rule we just read from the previous slide, is that identity, gender identity, is your internally how you feel. Expression is how you manifest how you feel. But that changes, and that can change at the drop of a hat. You can watch a movie, and all of a sudden your emotions will make you change to feel something else. There is no more standard. God set the standard in Genesis, and in that standard he said he made them male and female. We'll close in today. When we get through the program, we're going to get into a couple of scriptures, just a couple, to reinforce what the Bible says. And when you get away from that standard, this is the mess you get into. And it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. Canadian bias against Christianity. Because of the laws that are changing, the Canadian bias against Christianity, this is from the Canadian Broadcast News from Edmonton, reveals that bias reporting the story calling Christianity controversial. So now this is where this is all going. This is the ultimate goal of what's been taking place around the world and why we have been so focused in bringing this kind of story out to our listeners. This is the ultimate goal right here, that Christianity can no longer be tolerated. It is a controversial issue that does not follow the mainstream of society, and we must get rid of it. All right, so now we're beginning to see this picking up to this stage. The stage now that's picking up is this. If it resembles anything that's godly, it has to be attacked, it has to be destroyed, and it has to be removed. And what we've been witnessing, and the reason we're focused on these issues a lot in the last few months, is because the changes have been moving so fast that the foundation is like it's on quicksand, and it can topple at any minute. Look what's happened already in Canada, and it's taking place in England also, where the Christian schools, because they're not teaching the LGBT, transgender, and all of the things that modern society is beginning to teach, they're not certifying their students. Canada went one step further. The Alberta School Board discriminates against Christian schools for using the Bible, claiming it violates the Alberta human rights. So in Canada now, they have reached that point that because of their laws and what they believe people have to live by, that this school has violated, because it lives according to Scripture, they have violated the rights of those in Alberta. Going on, it says, the dispute about the Bible verses had led to the decision by the public school board to stop operating a Christian K-12 school in nearby Kingman, Alta. Absolutely amazing. It has actually reached the stage now because the Christian movement, the conservative Christian movement, who are not willing to tolerate the changes in the societies today, they've been reaching a point now that they're not approving of the schools, they're not certifying the students, and now they're shutting them down. It's only a matter of time that the protections that we enjoy here in the United States, and thanks to this recent election, to give us a little bit more time to proclaim the warning to the world, those protections now are beginning to encroach upon God's people, and we will be entering what God talks about somewhere in the very near future, the famine of His Word. I wanted to bring those points out, and I want to tie all this in together because you think that these are separate, isolated incidents. They don't have anything to do with one another, but they do. They're all tied into an evil aggression by Satan himself, who says he's angry and knows he has but a short time. So what we're witnessing is an all-out assault from every way of life, from every corner of the globe, to destroy anything even closely resembling God and His way, and anything tied into these scriptures. And when we see those things taking place, what we want to do in this program is bring to your attention how they apply to Scripture and what we're actually looking at. Because a lot of people don't have a clue what they're looking at around the world. Many of the churches are changing. They're accepting the gay movement as an approval and acceptance by God. Even the Pope has leaned his way toward that direction. The Republican Party, at their last presidential, the campaign they ran to nominate the next president, changed their position to support the gay movement. People today in the United States are not willing to stand up for fear of whatever the repercussions are, to stand up for God's way. Some churches still are, and many people are around the country, but they're becoming more and more persecuted and more silenced. So we're going to continue to see that taking place, and while we have the time, we're going to focus on those issues. Today, Tammuz 9. What does Tammuz 9 have anything to do with all of what I've been talking about today? Tammuz 9 is an incredible story that we actually brought out 2 years ago. I want to talk about that today because you see, all of these issues in the news all relate to what took place on Tammuz 9 in 2015. 2 years ago, we did a video. In fact, we're going to be offering it online again this week. It's on the archives. It's called The Biblical Mystery of Tammuz 17, not Tammuz 9. But in that video, we talk about Tammuz 9, and we tie that into America and the warnings of Tammuz 17. For the United States, Tammuz 9 is an incredible warning for our nation. So let's talk about that. Tammuz 17 in America. So what does Tammuz 17 got to do with Tammuz 9? June 26, 2015. Anybody remember June 26, 2015? We know one person does. One of our video camera people here, actually, that's his birthday. And he hates it every time we bring this up. He says, oh, every time you bring that up on my birthday, it brings bad news for his birthday. He will never forget what took place on that day. And I'll tell you his name, but Danny will get really upset. All of you know who Danny is. July 3rd, 2017 is the 2-year anniversary of June 26. Was that double talk? What am I saying here? July 3rd, this past Monday, is the 2-year anniversary of June 26 on God's calendar. On God's calendar, July 3rd this year fell on Tammuz 9 on God's calendar. So I want to bring out that up because you see, when we see things, we may not put all that together in trying to understand how that all applies, because the dates change on the Roman calendar versus God's calendar. But when that day came this year, you can rest assured on God's calendar, it was an anniversary that God remembers and won't forget, and the people are going to pay a price for. Let's talk about that. Tammuz is the 4th month of the Hebrew calendar. All right, it's 4th month. It averages 29 days and so many hours and minutes. It's in the summer in most cases, and it usually falls on June or July, depending on the Hebrew calendar, which is 360 days, versus our calendar, which is 365.25 days. So it moves. So our calendar has actually obscured what God's calendar is and what God goes by, because He says He changes not. So let's talk about Tammuz 9, American. Let's pull all this into the stories we brought in today. June 26, 2015, Tammuz 9. It was the ruling by the Supreme Court to approve same-sex marriage. It was the day that we broke from the biblical established laws of God, the principles of God, the marriage of one man and one woman, to say that it's okay for 2 men or 2 women. From this ruling just 2 years ago, we have seen an incredible amount, a huge amount of change of all the transgendering and all the gender identity and everything that's been taking place in just 2 short years. Can you imagine that? 2 short years until this law changed. Everything was held at bay because there was still a standard, and that standard was God's holy word. When we took the holy word out as the standard, everyone went crazy who doesn't follow God. It was the second time for the national approval of sin. The first was the approval of abortion back in '73. Today, there are many people now who are challenging the abortion issue and the right to life. This issue is not being challenged. It's incredible because this is the issue that God relates to, where he says, in the last days, it will be like the days of Sodom, and it will be like the days of Gomorrah. And as we know the story with Lot, who offered his daughters to the men who were in the streets, and they didn't want the women, they wanted the men to do things to the men. And Jesus told us that it'll be like the days of Sodom, and it'll be like the days of Gomorrah. We have reached, and now we're launching ourselves into areas that you could never believe that have ever happened. I remember years and years ago, Garner Ted said he wouldn't be surprised that one day they would walk a horse down an aisle and get married to. Well, it's gone beyond that. It's gone way beyond that in just 2 years. And people are approving it. June 26, 2015 fell on Tammuz 9 on God's calendar. Why is that significant? God has a way of bringing events about that take place that we can look back to events in history as a reminder so that we don't make the same mistakes. All right, so let's talk about that now. This year, Tammuz 9 fell on July 3rd, this week. And that's why we're telling the story today, because in 2 years, an incredible amount of change has taken place around the world and here in the United States. The Roman calendar versus the Hebrew calendar. All right, we have the month of June and the month of July, which are the 2 months where Tammuz would normally fall. This year, 2015, Tammuz 9 fell on June 26, was a Friday. The amazing thing about this is that it was reported that the Supreme Court was going to report on this decision for gay marriage anytime during this month. Wasn't it incredible that it actually fell on June 26th, which was Tammuz 9, which was a warning that God brings us back into the Old Testament of something that took place. Let's take a look at this now. On the exact same day in 2015, the Pope signed an accord with the PLO recognizing them as an official state. So here in America, while we are moving away from God, at the very same time, it's as if God takes his hands off and the Pope moves in to lay down the foundation for the PLO, who was at that time and still are paying people to kill Israelis, not just soldiers, but innocent men, women, and children, and enshrining them as they kill and murder people with the knives and bombs and just the continual perpetuation of evil in those nations on the exact same day. I found that incredible of what took place there. So let's look back now. Let's look at the timing. So we see that the Hebrew month of Tammuz in 2015 actually began on June 18th. So that's when it took place, moving all the way to Tammuz 9. So now let's move forward to see where it brings us to. Here we have Tammuz 17, which actually fell on that year, July 4th. That's why we talked about that story, the biblical mystery of Tammuz 17 in America. As you can see, on July 15th, just a few days after Tammuz 9, Tammuz 17, which was an incredible warning, a day of fasting for the Jews today because of the fall of the New Testament temple in the New Testament in 70 AD, which the breaching of the walls on June 17th, which begins a 3-week period of mourning to the 9th of Av and a day of fasting. So what is that with the 9th, Tammuz 9? So let's talk about that, right? July 4th fell on Tammuz 17. July 4th, 1776 also fell on Tammuz 17. These two events, the 17th in the New Testament, the temple in Jerusalem was breached. It was breached to allow the Roman armies to come in, and 3 weeks later, on the 9th of Av, it fell. In the Old Testament, on Tammuz 9, the walls in Jerusalem were breached in 586 BCE. And it was the same period from the 9th to the 9th of Av that the temple fell in the Old Testament. What are we looking at? We're looking at a warning on Tammuz 9 that when we pass this law relates back to the warning that our walls, just like ancient Jerusalem, have been breached. And that we have now taken away the protection of God's way from this nation. Just a few days later, to July 4th of that year, which was Tammuz 17, bringing us back to another warning, the founding of our nation on July 4th, 1776, that when our nation began, it began on a day in God's calendar, is if I will begin to bless and rebuild the nation of Israel on this day. But the warning was, on the day that you began, if you ever turn from me, we can look back to the New Testament and the fall of the temple in 70 AD. What is amazing, in 2015, it fell on Tammuz 17 again. Just 6 days, or 7 days, whatever it is, from Tammuz 9 to Tammuz 17, that the warning is staring us in the face because we have turned our backs on God. In this same year, the Pope who signed that accord with the PLO was in America on God's most sacred day of the year, on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. The Pope was in the White House being greeted and approved by this nation on God's sacred holy day. These warnings began the removal of God, and we believe, and what we're saying here is biblically based, is that what has been taking place since the removal of God and His standard in the way of life of man and woman, the way God created it, has only accelerated now the increase of evil around the globe, and especially upon our nation and these people. All right, let's go on. The date of the alarm through history. It's tied to events in history. The events of the destruction of Israel, and now what we're reporting, and we believe is true, and time will bear this out. We believe from Scripture now, we believe this is going to happen. We've got now just 2 years to show that this is taking place. It will become the destruction of America as we continue to remove God from our way. The events tied to the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem were forced to cease in the daily sacrifices. On the 9th of Tammuz, the walls were breached, and this was during the Old Testament when Nebuchadnezzar breached the walls to come into the land. The walls of Jerusalem were breached by the Romans in 70 AD. This was actually on Tammuz 17, that event. At that time, General Postumus burned the Torah in the second temple. The idol was placed in the temple the second time, and both temples fell on the 9th of Av, just a matter of weeks from the breaching of the wall, which tells us that the period of the time when the laws of God are breached, when we take down our defenses and using God as our wall of protection, it's only a matter of time until God has removed Himself, that Satan literally takes over. And we're seeing that right now. And when he does, he destroys everything in his path that even relates to God. And we're seeing that on a massive scale today around the world. In 2 years, the world has changed. There's been a mad rush of events of transgender, gender identification, and even gender neutral, which is quite interesting when you go to gender neutral. Why? What are we witnessing? We see how all these things are gender neutral. In other words, there's no more male, there's no more females, whatever people feel like they want to be. Genesis 1:26 and 27. God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And so God created man in his own image. The image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. All right, so that's not hard to understand. God created man in his image as a male and a female. What is Satan doing today? There is no more male and female. It's whatever you feel like. What is Satan doing? He's recreating mankind in his image. Without male, without female, no longer being able to procreate, to replenish the earth. Satan is creating a gender-neutral society after his own image. Matthew 22, 29 and 30 says this, Jesus answered and said to them, "You are mistaken, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven." So what are we looking at? We're looking at Satan, the fallen angel who deceives the whole world and deceived 1/3 of the angels who was cast down. Knowing now he has but a short time, his anger is ravaging around the globe as he destroys the image of male and female, the family of God that God has created in his own image. We're beginning to see that more and more now in an ever-escalating time period that we just can't imagine. How much longer we have? I can't believe it could go on much longer. Well, that's it for our program today, except we want to bring out a couple of pieces of news. We're going to close this story with a little video, a little inspiring video, because this is tough stuff. And sometimes people think it's bad news. But that's what we're here. We're here to bring out the news that God says we are to warn this world of. And really, we'd like to bring out positive news all the time. But if we just focused on just positive, we'd be no different than any other Protestant Catholic church around the world. You go to church, you feel good. But we've been sitting here and called out of this world for a warning. So what we're trying to do is pull together the pieces that are going on, showing how this world is escalating in its evil and destroying its future, and putting into a perspective to show you how it all portrays what the Bible tells us is going to happen at the end times, and putting them into a here and now perspective. These things are not prophetic. These things are actual news that are taking place that was prophesied to take place in the past. Where we are now in the here and now. And how much longer we have, I don't know. But I believe that when this administration changes and the left comes in, like in Canada and in England and other parts around this world, we're going to see the acceleration and the silence of God's holy word. So we want to thank all of you for supporting us. All of those that you can help us by spreading the word. Facebook, any kind of way, all these modern ways, send this information out while we have the time. You can be a big help by doing that for us, and we'd appreciate that. And we thank you for sharing this with everybody that you know. All right, now, as we begin to bring this to a close, we have online this week. It will be available, The Mystery of Tammuz 17, which we just showed you just a few minutes ago, from June 15th. That'll be online from the vault. So if you didn't see that video yet, take a moment and go look at that video. It's powerful. And you'll see what we said in 2015 has happened now. So in other words, it's coming to pass just that fast. This was the graphic, so if you go online, you're looking for it, you'll probably find this graphic online. This is what we're talking about, the rise of evil of Tammuz 17. All right, let's close this out today with video of the week, and then I'll come back right after this video. We've got a couple of announcements from our website, and then we'll close our program today. This video is called Simple Truths, and I'll be right back. Well, we're coming to the end of our program now. From the website, Jeff's asked me to let everyone know that he's added 9 new videos online. So by all means, stop by the website, the cogmi.org. Take a look at the new videos if you haven't seen all of them yet. And we put in the mail this past week, by the time you get this program, you should have already received your newsletter where we're talking about Tammuz 17, tying in the newsletter to the news nuggets and insights that you have today. And the story of Bricks and Stones, the 2 kingdoms, which will be ready in just a couple of weeks to mail out. So if you're not on the mailing list, by all means go online, sign up, or give us a call right here at the church, and we'll get the information from you, and we'll add you to the website. Well, that's it for our news, nuggets, and insights. And just remember, as gloomy as it sounds, when we see these things coming to pass, Jesus Christ says, hold your head up high because salvation draws near. Until next week, God be with you from God's Unchanging Word.